It has often been said that to permit ignorance is to empower it. To do nothing, as our leaders proclaim absurdities, is a crime of complacency. It is in this context we strive to examine the pertinent issues behind the recent allegation raised by the governor of Edo State, Godwin Obaseki, that the Central Bank of Nigeria printed 60 billion naira in order to fund the budget in March 2021, that cast a spotlight on the activities of the CBN under Godwin Emefiele, the governor of the Central Bank. To look at these issues and others surrounding this is the founder and publisher of DataFight, a media research and data analytics organization with a mission to deploy data tools and technology for socio-economic development of Nigeria. He also doubles as the executive director of the Interactive Initiative for Social Impact, a civic technology organization using interactive media and technology to influence practices and policies that empower vulnerable groups. Mr. Joshua Olufemi, welcome to Sahara TV, sir.
Thank you for having me, sir.
Mr. Joshua, let's get your perspective on this. Nigerians, including myself, are actually struggling to understand the allegations claimed by Governor Godwin Obaseki that the CBN printed 60 billion to states to fund their budget. I mean, could you help us get the sense of this? What was your initial reaction when you heard it? And what's the propriety of CBN action in this regard?
Okay, thank you so much for the question. I guess when I saw the news, the first thing was to ask this basic question: are we talking about lending or we're talking about printing? Of course, the technicality of it, as you will have seen across different social media networks, it's something that shouldn't be so complex, but because of the language of banking in the country. So the difference between lending and and printing is very little. Every time you print, you are more or less lending. But not every time you lend that you're printing, right? When we say government, when we say you print, it means that you are typically just printing out raw cash and you're putting it either in the vault of the CBN, and then the banks then come around and then cash it out, and then provides it to whether government or any other person to use. And you can easily, if you go through the books of the CBN, you will see that over time, especially from 2015, they've consistently been printing money. That is real printing. And a simple way to look at it is that you will see that if you go to the money and credit statistics of CBN, as of 2014, what we have as reserve money, right, was about 4.9 trillion. As of today, you have over 13.4 trillion. Now, reserve money and cash money are ways that government, or the central bank prints money. So typically, in the last 5 years, you can say categorically that CBN has been printing money. Now, straight to what Obaseki said about whether it's printed money or it lent money out. It's easy to say that it was more of lending than printing. But both ways, I think you are still doing what probably is against the law that established the CBN. Now, there's a part of the CBN law that says that the CBN cannot loan or lend more than 5% of the revenue of the federal government the year before. So it means that if the federal government made 100 naira at its revenue in 2020, by 2021, CBN must not borrow the federal government more than 5 naira, right? But what you've seen over time, as a matter of fact, from 2015, you have seen that the CBN broke that law arbitrarily, has continued to break that law, using its own data to talk back to it, right? So a simple way to look at it is look at the overdraft on budgetary accounts that the CBN has. And when we looked at that, in 2015, the total collected revenue of the federal government was about 6.9 trillion. And it loaned it at that point, it gave it an overdraft on budgetary account of about 856 billion. That was an average of 12%, which is about 7% more than. As of 2019, it has actually given nothing less than 85% of what the federal government generated as overdraft.
Mm.
So if anybody has its way, if you had a functional judiciary, you had a functional legislative arm, you should be calling for the head of the CBN governor. But you can't, because that's actually, that's breaking the law entirely. There's no two ways to it. But you can then come from of course, in economics, we talk about positive economics and normative economics. Normative economics looks at, the moral or the moral side to how policies are made. The positive side says 5%, don't go beyond it, and that's it. At no point. So when the law is blind, it stays on 5%. But when you're looking at moral suasion, you can then say, oh, that's where the government says ways and means. Oh, we know that the Nigerian government is not attractive to foreign lenders, it's not attractive to domestic lenders such as other banks. And what do we do? If you don't give them the money, they won't be able to pay salaries, and other things. And at that point in time, you can then say, oh, we want to adjust beyond what the law says. But you don't do it internally. You have to approach the National Assembly. You have to say, we want to break the law. Help us revise the law so that we don't break the law, right? Or you have, some kind of agreement. And you've got to be also open about it to the public. And that's why you see some assumptions about, whether you're printing or you're not printing, and why, a governor who himself benefits, from the lending is now crying foul. And that says to you that he's coming from, I don't know, whatever, ulterior motive he has, but it's just raising the flag that the CBN is going beyond, beyond its measures and means, to provide ways and means to the federal government.
So what you're saying in essence is that something is fundamentally wrong, and that the actions of the CBN is actually illegal in as much as the CBN Act is saying with regards to advances to the federal government, which is supposed to be 5% based on what you said of the previous year's revenue. Now, earlier on, you made a statement which concerns a lot of Nigerians. Under normal circumstances or in this kind of situation, it's quite understandable that the law has been broken. Whose head should go? Is it that of the president or the governor of the central bank himself? So somebody should be held out. Who should have been held accountable at this point in time?
So I don't want to play a judge because I don't know the entire, I would say ambit of what the law, in the interpretation, of who should go, who shouldn't go. The question is, but I can give you a simple scenario. If you are a bank owner, right, and your bank manager goes against your rules, who do you fire? Do you fire yourself as a bank owner or do you fire the bank manager? Most times the bank owner will fire the bank manager and will find a way to resolve the issue. I mean, that pretty much just explains it. But, like I said to you, the reason why the CBN probably is untwisted, to do this is that even if you have a new CBN governor, you may still have that guy being, from day one of coming to power or coming to on his the seat, also breaking the same law. Because if you stop, you are probably saying the federal government should not be able to fund or finance its expenditure. I mean, last year alone, over 2 trillion was borrowed, from the CBN. So the question is, if that 2 trillion wasn't there, some of the projects that the federal government is executing, like the railways that have been paraded all over the place, the bridges that have been paraded all over the place, even the anchor borrower that the president had to use to shut us up during the NSAS protest, to say, I'm giving you guys, money to buy, some instrument of the CBN, or it's also in its way what would not have happened if those loans are not allowed or CBN didn't exercise that. So we're probably going to be saying, fire this guy, but we're also asking for some form of financial anarchy for government at the end of it. So it's a two-edged sword. You fire anybody, whether CBN governor or the president himself, or you align them, and then we are ready to face the consequences. Not to say that there's no way out of this. There are other fiscal instruments that the federal government can employ rather than just borrowing up to 85% of what you made last year. No bank will give you that money globally. Will give you 85% of what you made as loan for the new year that you want to run. And those are issues that I think the National Assembly and policymakers, the MPC, the Monetary Policy Committee, need to also begin to raise questions. They should not be. They should be bold enough to whistleblow and make Nigerians understand these issues so that we can together deliberate and set up a way forward.
Earlier on, you also stated that this is more like a lending to the federal government, to the states, and it's quite sickening to realize the fact that most of these states themselves are not actually meeting up with their obligations towards paying back. And the fact also remains that the CBN has been making these illegal advances to the federal government and state government without any underlying instrument. What does that portend for the economy? And how long will the CBN be able to sustain this?
We already are feeling the implication of the borrowings. As of today, cumulatively, the subnational government have also borrowed over 700 billion naira from the central bank. Something that it didn't happen until, say, 2016 when they did the first 300 billion. And then in 2018, it moved up to 600 and something billion. But generally, the implication is inflation, right? People will say, oh, it's not only monetary, side of things that causes inflation. But by and large, somebody of an economist of a very great reputation in the past will say always and everywhere inflation it's a money phenomenon. So it's generally created because it's a function of putting more money in supply. And every time you do that, see what I said, as of 2014, all the money in circulation, quote and unquote, was about 4 trillion. And today you have 13 trillion. You have about 9 trillion, both cash and electronic money in circulation, right? And the question is, it becomes very difficult, for people to kind of want to save. And when you don't save, because they have a lot of cash, there's a lot of instruments that don't want to, complicate the issue. But overall, it creates inflation. And when you have inflation, who bears the brunt the most? It's, people below, below the ladder of convenience or of affluence. That's poor people in the country. People who live on 30,000 in a month, who probably would need to use about 10,000 of it to buy food because you also don't have electricity and probably don't have enough to transport themselves around. So you can begin to talk about the ripple effect. And because the states themselves and the federal government itself is not so much generating a lot of money. Right? The same government that generated as a 2011, 2012, 10 trillion. In 2019, 8 to 9 years after, it's still generating the same 10 trillion. It means that it's not moving anywhere, but it's creating more, it's borrowing much more. So, you can begin to see that, Nigeria has never, the federal government has never collected beyond 12 trillion in the last 10 to 11 years. So, and it's borrowing at almost the same, rate. So it's inflation, it's for everyday Nigerian, it is, what we call suffering.
Now, Mr. Joshua, you're a data researcher, analyst. Maybe you will help us put this in the proper perspective. How much is the amount of the illegal borrowing that the CBN has done at this time? If there are records of, in terms of, and we want to know, has the CBN actually, in terms of disclosure and transparency, has the CBN been forthright? How transparent has the CBN been?
So it's always easy to talk about transparency from a point of openness, right? So it's about how open the CBN is regarding its borrowings to government. You will say yes, because if you go to its website, if you check all these financial statistics, the figures are there. That's where I'm able to get you these figures too, to say, as of today, the federal government is owing CBN at least as a claim, almost 11 trillion, as overdraft, 9 trillion. So openness, transparency, that's clear, right? But there's also the typical components, the terminologies that are used as a way of also keeping you, less informed or more confused. I think that's the place where you begin to have, the challenge, and that's what you see played out between the CBN governor and the state governor. I mean, saying, "Oh, we printed, we didn't print, we lent, we didn't." So that's some. So if you print, let us know you print and write it in clear terms or put it in a press release. If you have done ways and means, this is what it is. I mean, I think about 2 to 3 months ago, the head of the debt management office was saying that the federal government is looking for a way to change its almost over 10 trillion naira ways and means into some kind of instruments. Now the question is, the same law says in Section 38 subsection 3, I think B or C, says that the CBN must not take, other instruments as payment for the loan that the federal government gave it. That means that CBN is not supposed to take, bonds as repayment. It should take the same cash, that the federal government. So it means that normally, if the federal government wants to pay back, this money you make from NNPC, you just directly, send this to the vault. The money you make from customs and FRS, you send it straight to the vault, not by creating new treasury bills. Even though the CBN can buy treasury bills of government, but the government cannot pay back CBN its loans by saying, "Oh, you buy 60% of our treasury bills as a way of repaying you back." That's also breaking the law.
Yeah, one begins to wonder, why will Godwin Obaseki, who has been a beneficiary of this largesse, as you mentioned earlier, why will he have raised this alarm at this time, having been a beneficiary for years as an APC governor? And considering the fact that state governors, they continue the trends of their mismanagement and reckless borrowing. As are they themselves, are they concerned? Are some of the governors themselves, are they concerned? Are they frustrated with the president's actions? And has Buhari become a lame duck presidency?
At every point in time, a conscientious Nigerian will be concerned about, the health of its polity. Or whether from a fiscal, socio-political, or economic, standpoint. And so the flag that he's raising will mean either that is genuinely concerned, or that he thinks that some of his colleagues, the governors, are also the ones really asking for more money when he seems to be, more. You can hear some other, rumors or agenda that, "Oh, you can say this because you take 30% derivation outside of what every other person takes." So you may not worry if some states like it down the line does not have enough, or Ebonyi does not have enough, or Kebbi does not have enough, since they don't get 30% derivation as extra cash that comes to them. So you hear those kind of things as why people think, "Oh, you can say it, we can't say it." But the question still remains the same. You should not be asking that under the federal, account, which already has a law that sets up how it should be shared. You should share what is available. After that, don't ask for more. And I think that's the point he's raising, and where he's very, in order for him to raise that flag. You don't borrow more. If you want to borrow, let the states reach out on a different, I would say, platform to borrow. Don't module it together as part of FAC payment, right? There's a law that sets up how the FAC should be distributed. Follow that. So I think that there's a lot of legal implications to what Obaseki was saying. And there's also the socioeconomic implication, which I think we would imagine worries him beyond every other political statement. And I personally don't think that the response that the CBN governor gave him was a genuine one, right? If your counterpart within the economy is telling you that what you're doing it needs to be reviewed, you then don't say, oh, we are going to come after you guys to pay us back what you're owing us. The first question is, why did you borrow them in the first place if you knew it was not going to become a bit?
Now, analysts have actually stated and raised questions about where the funds that are being borrowed or lent to the federal government and the state governments in order to underwrite their expenditures are going. Questions have been raised and issues concerning the fact that some of these expenditures have been going to non-value adding expenditures of the government. 80% of government payments goes into salaries and debt services. Yet the CBN continued to underwrite the federal government, allowing the government to balance its book and continue to spend. The question on the minds of most Nigerians at this point in time is that, is there a potential scandal that is brewing with regards to the mismanagement of the microeconomy?
I mean, so there's a part of my life that is journalistic, and in that you don't tell what you assume, you only tell what you see. I mean, so we'll just expect that if there is a scandal that is brewing, we pray that we'll get a whistleblower or that the investigative genre of journalism is able to, unearth that component. But I mean, we can rightly assume that because you are a country known for scandals, we're a country known for corruption, there is that likelihood. But the simple reason why you will see some people, assume that way is also because there's a level of, there's some lack of transparency and accountability, in terms of how government makes its information available to people. Because if you already know how every kobo is spent, you will know whether it's been stolen or it's been used wrongly. And you can see that year in, year out, the anti-corruption agencies such as the EFCC, the ICPC, keeps going after contractors, government project contractors, keep going after governors and other political office holders. And that already tells us that it's still part of this money that they are being held, to account or for sanction about. So we can assume, but I mean, until we have something that we can call evidence, we can only assume that it's awful.
Do we see any end in sight? Do you personally see any possibility of us getting out of this fiscal mess?
I think the only end I have in sight is the fact that you probably need a change of government, whether as when due or somebody's calling for it and it's taken. But if you look at all the dynamics of governance and its spending, I think that the end is very, very far and almost, just not in this generation. We're talking of, CBN, somehow just manipulating the system by not allowing government to borrow and now coming out to be the, not just being government borrowers and bankers borrower, but also now, lender, but also now becoming citizens lender through some of its own policy programs like the anchor borrower, like the, and the rest of them. It's just one way of saying, government, let's help you to borrow. Let's help you to, let's lend you and not say that we are lending you. And then we call it a policy. When you hear things like the CBN was going to give money for COVID-19, it sounded nice because we are all desperate for, relief, for respite. But I mean, it's technically out of place, right? Technically, CBN should not say, I want to give this amount of money. No, you probably find a way to give it to the government to, so those are some of the reasons why I personally think that the end is very far, but it's possible. We've seen economies that are worse off that came out, came back, strong. There were economies that we had almost the same indicators and indices as I say, the 80s, who today are some of them are even, now giving aids and grants to the federal government of Nigeria. It means that they work their way to, to goodness, and it means that Nigeria can work its way. But like you said, all the recommendations have to come to play. Your policies have to be such that allows the private sector to thrive. You've got to ensure that you are cutting down your cost of governance. You've got to ensure that, you've got to ensure that you cut down on arbitrary spending, when it's not necessary. You've got to really, really bring to bear, that socioeconomic policies that drive the nation. I mean, we cannot always be a nation where when the price of oil goes down, we now start to put all the savings that we have into agriculture. I mean, and when we are back, all the money we then put into agriculture, they then become bad loan. We are not even thinking about to get them back. We're just, we are back to boom. I mean, so all of you can. So a lot of people are going into bank, getting loans from federal government on agriculture. Because thankfully, oil is giving us a lot of, rough sale. But the question is, what measures do we have in place to ensure that this money is recouped and is used for other sectors, for instance? I mean, so you need thinkers, you need deliberate, policy, decision makers to help us out of this mess that we are in a country. But I mean, trust me, I'm very optimistic about Nigeria, but I'm also very pragmatic about the fact that we are not 10, 20 years close to.
Mr. Joshua Olufemi, thank you so much for your insightful analysis.